"You built nothing without us," my mother declared, voice ricocheting off the glass walls of Glenpire Health. My father stood stiff beside her, arms folded like a metronome. Lena held her phone up, filming with clinical cheer. "We supported you emotionally through every single struggle. We deserve compensation for the emotional labor we provided during your journey." I sat at the head of the table, fingers around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. Daniel, my lawyer, a man with the patience and inflexibility of a judge, was to my right. Between us lay the lawsuit documents, crisp, formal, absurd. They were suing me for $24 million. The figure had the feel of someone picking a number out of the air and then squaring it to sound serious. "My name is Clara. I am 33. 6 years ago, on a Wednesday in March, I turned 27. The day is a line on a map I can still find. A small studio apartment in Portland, leftover Chinese food in a Tupperware container, a plastic cake in a grocery bag." My phone did not ring. The only voice that acknowledged my birthday was the Uber driver who saw the cake and smiled. My family had not forgotten. They had simply never cared. Biotechnology is a ruthless world, and I found my place inside it by making things that mattered, instruments that reduced contamination in pharmaceutical research and saved companies time and money. Glenpire Health, my company, held patents that altered workflows in labs across the country. When success finally arrived, it arrived quietly at first, then in headlines and acquisition offers. Then it arrived as entitlement. "Your claims lack legal foundation," Daniel said now, quietly efficient. "Emotional support is not a quantifiable business contribution." My mother, Evelyn, who could turn memory into myth, blinked as if she'd been misunderstood. "We always believed in you," she said. She had perfected the grammar of supportive fiction. My father, Martin, who sold insurance and believed the world ran on charisma and small talk, had spent my childhood telling me I wasn't cut out for science. He remembered a conversation differently, telling me to get a real job when I spoke of patents. Lena remembered everything because Lena was always the center of things. Parties, photographs, the correct answer to every question my parents asked themselves. I thought of the acceptance letter I'd held at 15, the one that would have sent me to a summer program that might have rewritten the life I was given. My father glanced at it once, then returned to his newspaper. "That's nice, Clara. Lena's homecoming is this weekend." I think of the photo albums where my sister's smile occupies entire spreads, while mine is tucked in the margins, a footnote. "You never encouraged me," I said now, and I could feel the office air condense around the moment. "You never called on my 27th birthday. You didn't come to my graduation. You didn't visit when I was in the hospital 3 years ago." Evelyn's eyes narrowed at the directness, then widened as she softened into the practice script. "We were protecting you from disappointment." Lena, 35, divorced and back under the roof that had always favored her, waved her phone like a banner. "We have witnesses," she said. "People who will say we were always there for her." "Then bring them to court," Daniel said without heat. "Discovery will be illuminating." They left the meeting believing victory was already theirs. They passed the wall of framed articles and the display case of our patents without seeing them. They had never seen them. They had never seen me, not really. The hypocrisy was almost elegant. I had been a ghost in my own family for years because it had been easier to slip into the background than to insist on being seen. Lena grabbed rooms as if she'd paid admission. I learned to keep my head down. I graduated high school in 2010 at the top of my class. Perfect grades, a 99th percentile test score, 5 university offers, full scholarships. My parents clapped politely at the ceremony and then left to help Lena move into a city apartment with her boyfriend. They missed my award ceremony. That was a pattern. College felt like breathing for the first time. I moved to Seattle, worked in a lab on campus, took extra classes, spent summers in research positions, and learned the patient architecture of experiments. My phone rarely rang and I stopped expecting it to. I sent updates now and then out of obligation, text messages that read like weather reports. My mother replied with short phrases and emojis that felt like placeholders. My father rarely replied at all. Lena called once in 4 years when she needed someone to watch her apartment. I said no. It was the first time I had put myself first. I worked for a pharmaceutical company in Portland for 3 years after college. I found inefficiencies nobody else wanted to see and designed clever machinery to solve them. At 26, encouraged by a supervisor who'd finally noticed my stubborn competence, I incorporated Glenpire Health 3 months before my birthday. I maxed 2 credit cards for legal fees and equipment, rented a tiny lab in an industrial park, and slept on a cot in the corner of the workbench because I couldn't pay for both rent and business supplies. On the morning of my 27th birthday, I woke early and checked my phone. Nothing. I waited until 9, then noon. Voicemail. I left a message that drifted into the cellular ether. The Uber driver that night, gentle in a way my family never was, saw the small cake in my grocery bag and wished me well. I cried not from sadness, but from a kind of luminous, clarifying grief, an understanding that I would never be enough for them. So I stopped trying. I disappeared into the work. The prototype for the contamination prevention system took shape 6 months later. Elegant, efficient, and affixed to a problem that cost labs millions. A Denver company field-tested our device and found it improved outcomes by 40%. They ordered 50 units, then introduced me to other labs. Clients in 8 states followed. A waiting list formed. I hired my first employees. And I reinvested everything back into product development. They called twice during that growth. Once when Lena needed a reference for a loan, I declined. Once when my mother told me my father had changed insurance providers and I was no longer covered. I hadn't been since college. The call lasted 90 seconds. I didn't mention the contracts, the patents, the piles of small hard wins. Telling them would have been a plea I knew I'd lose. We reached a milestone when Glenpire grew to 75 employees and annual revenue exceeded $20 million. Industry press wrote about our innovation. I spoke at conferences. Offers from investors and competitors came in like rain. Last year, a multinational pharmaceutical corporation proposed a merger. Glenpire would become semi-independent, but integrated into a global infrastructure. The valuation landed at $73 million. I called my mother after the deal closed. She called back after 3 weeks to say she wanted her share. They believed motherhood alone gave them rights to what I had built with sleepless nights, scraped funds, and the quiet hunger of someone determined to be real. The entitlement shook me more than the lawsuit itself. They filed 3 weeks after the merger announcement, papers arriving on a Tuesday while I reviewed quarterly projections. The suit claimed they had provided essential emotional support and deserved compensation, calculated as lost opportunity costs for emotional labor. Every line was fiction. I called Daniel immediately. "Can they win?" I asked. "Not likely," he said. "But they can attach a cost to your time. Litigation, even frivolous litigation, is a burden. You can settle quietly, get a non-disclosure, and avoid the personal fallout." "No," I said. The pause on the line was full of legal calculus. "They don't deserve it, and I want people to know who they are." The initial meeting with our lawyers was theater. My parents performed sorrow and sacrifice on cue. "Clara has always been selfish," my mother said at one moment, as if reciting a trauma script. Lena spoke about believing in me when others doubted. Their lawyer, Alan, a man who usually handled fender benders and insurance claims, looked out of his depth among corporate counsel. Afterward, Daniel and I began to gather what discovery would demand. Phone records, emails, messages, anything to prove a pattern of absence. The evidence was a ledger of silence, missed birthdays, ignored invitations, unanswered calls during hospital stays. Colleagues stepped forward with observations about my family's absence during the slow, anonymous hardships no one photographs. The pattern that emerged from the documents suggested not neglect by chance, but a kind of willful inattention. That was the strategy. Make their version of the past meet the documents of the present, and let the law's slow mechanisms do their sorting. But I also wanted something more personal, for them to understand the audacity of their claim. Suing me was not merely a bid for money. It was an attempt to rewrite history and harvest benefit from erasure. There were moments I relived with a specific clarity, standing at a graduation ceremony while the applause felt distant, sleeping on a cot beside a centrifuge, presenting a prototype to a skeptical scientist and being told later that I had changed how their lab worked. I relived the night in my studio apartment when an Uber driver's notice of my cake was the only acknowledgement I received for turning 27. That night was my hinge. It had tilted me from seeking family validation to constructing a life that would not require it. When the summons arrived, my first thought was not legal jeopardy, but the strain of exposure. Litigation would make my family's private calculus public: phone logs, emails, witness testimony. My parents had built a narrative about themselves as supportive and morally injured. I could see their faces in the conference room now, as if they had rehearsed all the hurt and then brought scripts to the table. During discovery, Lena's friend list and my mother's messages did not produce the feast they hoped for. There were condolence texts and holiday greetings, distractions rather than anchors. The text message my mother waved in the conference room, a single, "That is wonderful, sweetie," with 3 heart emojis, sent the day I landed a first major contract, felt like a relic for their altar. It was a minor kindness 4 years into what had been years of silence. It was tempting to feel triumphant as the evidence mounted. But this case was never only about winning in court. It was about the story they intended to tell and the one I intended to keep telling. They wanted money and the narrative that I could only have become who I was because of them. I wanted the opposite, for it to be known that I had been made by the stitchwork of my own days, that my achievements were the product of a life spent building, failing, repairing, and then building again. When the judge finally approved the schedule for motions and depositions, something else changed in me. The legal reel, emails, calendar entries, phone logs, would be examined, and with it, the private architecture of us. I did not relish the public dismantling of my family, but neither would I be silenced to avoid a spectacle they created. In the months that followed, as subpoenas circulated and depositions were scheduled, people I had chosen to keep close stood at my side. Employees who had watched late nights and repaired instruments on pallets. Colleagues who knew the origin of patents and the odd hours I kept. A few friends who remembered a girl with a plastic cake and a dream. They did not come as witnesses for the story my parents intended. They came to testify to the truth of my life. My parents, for their part, performed a different endurance. They each told a version of themselves in interviews and in rooms where the tape recorded it. Evelyn's voice had the practiced cadence of someone certain she'd been wronged. Martin spoke about sacrifice, about love that was not always expressed in convenient ways. Lena recited the small courtesies she'd done, once bringing me a casserole when I was sick years earlier, leaving out a magnified kindness that could be made to stand in for a life. The judge's questions, when they finally came, were procedural rather than moral. Was there a contract? Had my parents incurred measurable costs tied directly to my business? The legal scaffolding required clear causation. The emotional valence of family history, as real as it often felt, did not translate easily into a damages spreadsheet. That was the law's cold mercy. I don't recount the courtroom scenes as victories so much as an unmasking. The narrative my family wanted to sell collapsed under the weight of documents and witness memory. Discovery showed a pattern of non-involvement and selective attention, not the constant support they claimed. The jury, when the case finally reached them, after months of motions and hearings, considered the evidence that pantomimed love and the evidence of absence. They returned a verdict that echoed the ledger. There was no legal entitlement to what I had built. But verdicts do not always settle what happens next in human hearts. My parents left the courthouse with their dignity rearranged, but their conviction intact. Lena posted a photo the next day of herself smiling with a cup of coffee, as if the sunlight alone could fix everything. For me, the judgment was both relief and a reopening. I had spent years building proof of my value into instruments and contracts and patents. I had thought that success might finally be the remedy for a childhood of being unseen. It was not. It was, instead, a boundary. an answer to the people who assumed proximity meant claim. They had believed that my existence on their birth certificates gave them a retroactive birthright to my work. They misread biology for proprietorship. What I learned in the trial's aftermath was not only how to litigate, but how to be resolute about the story I would live. I could keep aching for acknowledgement from people who had never given it. Or I could accept that the person who had held the flashlight during all those late nights, who had read the grant applications and recopied the diagrams in dim light, was myself. The case closed. The press moved on. Glenpire Health settled back into its work, refining designs, shipping orders, negotiating new partnerships. I walked back into my lab one morning and sat at the bench where I used to sleep and found the cot gone, replaced by better chairs and a coffee machine that no longer sputtered. The instruments hummed. The work continued. The wall of patents looked the same as before, but now there was an internal clarity that had nothing to do with headlines or valuations. If family had been a mirror, it had been a stained one. I cleaned what I could and kept the reflection I needed. Sometime later, my mother left a message. It was brief. "Call when you can. We miss you." I listened once, then saved the message and did not return the call. That silence felt less like punishment than an answer. I had spent decades seeking proof that I was deserving. I had found it in the way a lab notebook filled with results, in the small signatures on contracts, in the steady accumulation of work. The world that mattered, colleagues, and clients and the instruments that made their work possible, recognized me without ceremony. You can be raised to occupy certain roles without being obligated to obey them forever. They had tried to claim what I had made. I fought back, not for the money, but for the principle of being the author of my own life. The law gave me a verdict. The life I kept building afterward, day by day, prototype by prototype, patent by patent, was my real vindication. In the end, I realized the truth of something simple and grim. Sometimes the people who birthed you cannot live up to the mythology of their own love. And sometimes you must build your own family. From the evidence of who shows up when the lights go out, it was a declaration of war they could not win. Began making phone calls. Journalists covering biotechnology, business magazines, local news. I never mentioned the lawsuit, only offered myself for interviews about resilience and success. 2 weeks later, the first article appeared in a regional business magazine, The Self-Made Success, How One Woman Built a $73 million Company with No Safety Net. I spoke of being alone on my 27th birthday, working 18-hour days with no encouragement, building something extraordinary from nothing. The story went viral. My family read it. I knew because Lena called 3 days later, furious. "You made us look bad," she said in a voicemail. I saved it. It would be useful in court. The second interview came in a national business journal. The journalist was sharp. "On your 27th birthday, you were alone. The same week you incorporated Glenpire Health?" "Yes." "Did your family acknowledge that milestone? Or your first contract, your patent approvals?" "No." The silence said everything. "My family and I have different perspectives on success," I told her. They valued certain achievements. Mine weren't among them. The headline read, "When Family Becomes Obstacle, the Hidden Cost of Building an Empire Alone." My mother demanded a retraction. The magazine declined. Every word had been true. Meanwhile, the lawsuit crawled forward. My attorney, Daniel, filed for dismissal. Their lawyer, Alan, grasped at anything, claiming emotional support was a business service, that family ties created implicit contracts. He submitted affidavits from acquaintances who witnessed unwavering support. Daniel shredded them. No dates, no details, no substance. Judge Constance, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, presided. "Counselor," she said, "make your argument." Daniel stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs claim they're owed compensation for emotional support. The law does not recognize such a service without a contract. There's no documentation, no evidence, no business relationship. The case is baseless," Alan rose weakly. "Family relationships are unique. Without their foundation, the defendant would not have succeeded. They are entitled to share in the rewards." Do you have a contract? No. Any legal precedent? No, Your Honor, but I'm dismissing this lawsuit with prejudice, Constance cut in. Emotional support is not compensable. Family does not equal entitlement. Court adjourned, the gavel struck. 90 seconds over. My family sat frozen, convinced until that moment they'd win something for simply being related to me. As we left, Daniel said quietly, "We'll file to recover legal fees." But for me, the real victory was knowing why they'd done it. 3 days before the hearing, I'd learned Lena had filed for bankruptcy. My parents had co-signed her loans. They owed over $90,000. The lawsuit had been their desperate solution. They were broke. They were drowning, and they'd tried to use me as a life raft. I wasn't done. The case had given me documentation, their lies, their betrayals. I met with Diana, an investigative journalist specializing in financial exploitation. I gave her everything: filings, phone records, the dismissed case file. "This is extraordinary," she said. "They sued you for emotional damages?" "Yes." "And it was dismissed with prejudice?" "Yes." She smiled, sharp as glass. "Then let's tell the world." 2 hours later, Lena called. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Answering questions honestly." "You're making us look bad." "If the truth does that, perhaps you should have behaved differently." "We are your family. You owe us loyalty." "Loyalty isn't one way." "You sued me." "Mom is devastated." "Mom didn't call me on my 27th birthday." Silence. "That was years ago." 6 years, I said. 6 years in which I built a $73 million company alone. And now you think you deserve a cut. "That's not family. That's greed," I hung up. My hands trembled. Not with anger, but relief. 4 weeks later, Diana's article ran in a national newspaper. "The Price of Success, When Family Becomes Predator." She'd done her homework, bankruptcy filings, loan documents, interviews with Lena's ex-employees who called her entitled and lazy, statements from my former colleagues who confirmed my parents' absence. She compared my mother's claims of nurturing me with phone records showing 18 months of silence. She juxtaposed my father's business advice with proof he'd refused me a $5,000 loan when I started Glenpire Health. The worst revelation: my parents had refinanced their house 3 times to cover Lena's debts, emptied their retirement, borrowed from friends. The lawsuit had been a last-ditch attempt to survive their own ruin. The article exploded. It went viral across social media, podcasts, and business columns. I was painted as the woman who triumphed despite her family, they as the predators undone by greed. Messages poured in, strangers sharing their own stories of exploitation, entrepreneurs who'd faced betrayal. Organizations invited me to speak. My family faced the opposite. My mother's friends vanished. My father was forced off his community board. Lena deleted her accounts after a flood of outrage. Their isolation was public and earned. 3 days later, Daniel called. "Their lawyer wants to settle." "Settle what?" "The case was dismissed. They'll pay your legal fees, sign a non-disclosure. In exchange, you stop the publicity." "No." "Clara, you've won. You've humiliated them. They called me selfish and sued me. I'm not granting them a quiet exit. So what do you want?" I'd asked myself that for weeks. Money was meaningless. Public shame had already come. "I want a public apology," I said, acknowledging they were never supportive, that the lawsuit was frivolous, that I owe them nothing. Published in the same paper as Diana's article, and they pay every cent of my legal fees. They'll never agree. Then I'll keep talking. More interviews. Maybe a book, Daniel exhaled. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Let them think that. They've underestimated me all my life. I'm done being dismissed." Beverly, their new attorney, called days later. "A public apology will humiliate my clients. They sued me for $24 million. Humiliation seems proportional. They'll pay your fees and sign an NDA. I don't want silence. I want honesty." Negotiations dragged for a week. Finally, they surrendered. The statement would run as a full-page advertisement in the same newspaper that carried Diana's article, complete with their names and photos. The settlement was signed on a Friday. They didn't appear. Beverly signed via proxy. 23 pages. Acknowledgement, payment, estrangement. This is over, Daniel said. No, I replied. This is the beginning. 3 weeks later, I saw the ad online. A photo of the business section, page 3, beside an article on new pharmaceuticals. We, Evelyn, Martin, and Lena, acknowledge that our daughter and sister Clara built Glenpire Health without our financial, emotional, or professional support. The lawsuit we filed was without merit and has been dismissed. We deeply regret our actions and acknowledge that Clara owes us nothing. Their portraits looked respectable, which made the confessions sting harder. The internet erupted. My family's names trended. Their faces were everywhere. The story's moral clarity, hard work versus entitlement, resonated deeply, and then something unexpected happened. Others began coming forward. Professionals who'd been sued by parents, stolen from by siblings, drained by supportive relatives. The conversation widened beyond me to the culture of family entitlement itself. 6 weeks later, I spoke at a women's entrepreneurship conference in Chicago. 3,000 attendees. On stage, I told the story, the silence, the lawsuit, the betrayal. How did you keep going? Someone asked. I built something that was mine, I said. They could lie, sue, or take credit, but they couldn't touch what I'd created. That knowledge was enough. The room rose to its feet. Afterward, women shared their own painful stories. Stolen savings, sabotaged ventures, betrayal disguised as love. I realized my family's actions weren't rare. They were simply visible. 2 days after Chicago, Daniel called again. We have a problem, he said. What now? Your sister filed a complaint with the state attorney general, claiming you coerced her into signing the settlement. I sat back. That's absurd. Beverly represented them. Everything was voluntary. I know. It won't hold, but it triggers an investigation. She can still make noise. Of course she could. That was Lena. When power failed, she turned to chaos. And as I listened, I understood something with crystalline clarity. I'd spent my life seeking peace from people who thrived on conflict. Now, finally, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. What do? We cooperate with the investigation, provide all documentation, and wait for them to dismiss the complaint, Daniel said. It'll be annoying but not dangerous. The investigation lasted 4 months. During that time, Lena gave interviews to small local outlets, claiming I'd bullied her into signing the settlement, that the public apology had ruined her reputation, that she was the true victim. The interviews flopped. People remembered the original lawsuit, the dismissal, Diana's article. They remembered she'd sued me for money I'd earned while she lived off our parents' dwindling savings. Her narrative collapsed under its own weight. The Attorney General's office requested documentation. Daniel sent over 300 pages, emails, transcripts, signed agreements. The evidence was overwhelming. Lena had been represented by counsel, participated actively in negotiations, and signed voluntarily. 6 months later, the complaint was dismissed. The Attorney General's statement was brief. All parties were adequately represented. No coercion had occurred. But during those 6 months, something inside me shifted. I had spent years chasing my family's approval, then years succeeding without them, then months trying to make them acknowledge what they'd done. It was all exhausting, a loop of disappointment. They'd never change, never take responsibility, never see me as anything but a resource or an obstacle. The lawsuit, the apology, the investigation, all different versions of the same pattern. They wanted something. When I refused, they attacked, so I stopped responding. No interviews, no statements, no checking for their names online. I focused entirely on my company. Glenpire Health grew. New markets, new products, brilliant hires. The company became larger than their betrayal. 3 months after the dismissal, I received a handwritten letter from my mother, 6 pages, certified mail. It was an attempt at reconciliation, regret, misunderstanding, family bonds. She said they'd learned from their mistakes and wanted to start over. I read it twice, looking for sincerity. There was none. The letter revolved around their suffering, their embarrassment, their financial strain. No acknowledgement of the years of neglect or cruelty. I filed it with the other lawsuit documents and had my assistant draft a response on company letterhead. I acknowledge receipt of your letter. I have no interest in reconciliation. Please do not contact me again. I signed it and never thought about them again. 2 years later, I got a call from a documentary producer named Bethany. She was making a series on family dynamics and entrepreneurship. Your story stands out, she said. You succeeded because you weren't weighed down by family expectations. Will my family be contacted? We'll reach out for comment, but it focuses on your perspective. I hesitated, then agreed. Not for publicity, but to create a permanent factual record. Filming took 2 weeks. They interviewed me about my childhood, my education, Glenpire's founding, and the lawsuit. They filmed my office, the labs, the patents, the meetings. Daniel explained the legal absurdity of the lawsuit. Diana discussed her investigation. My employees spoke about our culture and mission. Lena, of course, agreed to be interviewed. My parents declined. When the documentary aired 6 months later, I finally saw Lena's interview. She sat in our parents' living room overdressed, lamenting how I'd changed after success. She became cold and vindictive, she said. She could have helped us, but she chose to humiliate us. The editors were merciless. After her words, the film cut to phone records showing years of silence. The lawsuit. I used that visibility strategically. I launched a mentorship program for young women in biotechnology, especially those from unsupportive families. I funded scholarships for students who excelled despite adversity. I spoke openly about estrangement and building chosen families. Within 18 months, we had mentored over 200 students. Many launched their own companies. Each one quietly dismantled the myth that family support was essential for success. My family watched from a distance. I knew because people occasionally forwarded me Lena's posts. She'd started a blog about forgiveness and reconciliation, positioning herself as an expert. Few followed. Her posts were transparent attempts to rewrite history. Her audience dwindled to nothing. 3 years after the lawsuit, my parents lost their house. They moved to a small apartment in Portland. Lena moved back in. Their poor decisions had finally caught up. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, just distance. They had become strangers. 5 years after the lawsuit, Glenpire Health crossed $100 million in annual revenue. We operated in 5 countries, with over 400 employees and patents on 14 devices. Industry coverage now focused solely on innovation. The family drama had faded into irrelevance. We celebrated quietly, a company gathering, speeches about perseverance and teamwork. I avoided personal history. This was our success, not my vindication. Later that night, I sat in my office, watching city lights shimmer against the glass. Portland, the city of my loneliest birthday, my first lab, my rebirth. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I saw the article about Glenpire reaching $100 million. Congratulations. I'm proud of you. Love, Dad. 5 years of silence and now pride. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed a single line. You don't get to be proud of something you did nothing to create. I blocked the number. 10 minutes later, another message. This is Mom. Your father is heartbroken. We miss you. Can we please talk? Blocked again. More messages followed. Different numbers, different tones. Guilt, manipulation, desperation. I ignored them all. Daniel had ensured the settlement forbade contact. Each attempt was a violation. I could have sued them, but attention was what they wanted. Silence was more powerful. After the documentary, letters began arriving, hundreds, from people who'd been sued by family members. Their stories mirrored mine. Success followed by betrayal, achievement punished by entitlement. Parents suing children, siblings stealing patents, relatives twisting affection into ownership. I read every letter. I started responding, document everything. Maintain boundaries. Don't engage with manipulation. Build relationships with people who value you. The correspondence evolved into a formal advisory service. I hired a therapist specializing in estrangement and a lawyer experienced in family litigation. Together, we created free resources for anyone in similar situations. Funded entirely by Glenpire, the program helped over 3,000 people set boundaries, fight frivolous lawsuits, and build independent lives. My family learned about it through a newspaper profile. Lena posted a rant on her blog accusing me of exploiting other people's pain for revenge. The post got 37 views, 2 negative comments, and no replies. Her irrelevance was complete. On my 39th birthday, 6 years after the lawsuit, I finally took a real vacation. 2 weeks in a coastal cottage in New Zealand. No phone, no email. I woke up to sunlight and the sound of waves. 12 years earlier, I'd cried alone on my birthday. Now I was alone by choice, successful, peaceful, and free. My company thrived. My mentorship program flourished. I'd helped thousands escape toxic families. I'd proven that success without support wasn't just possible, it was powerful. When I returned to Portland, Daniel called me in. "Your sister is writing a book," he said. "About what?" "The lawsuit. Her version of everything. She's calling it a memoir on forgiveness." "Anything legally concerning?" "The NDA only covers settlement terms." "She's framing it as her perspective." "Let her write it," I said. "You're not worried?" "No one will read it. Publishers have already rejected it." "She's self-publishing. It'll vanish like her blog." He looked skeptical. "I'm certain," I said. "I'm done giving her power." Months later, I received a copy in the mail, anonymous, but clearly from her. I skimmed it. The predictable victim narrative, the revisionist history. I put it in the same box as the lawsuit documents and stored it in Daniel's office. Then I forgot about it. A year later, on my 40th birthday, I hosted a reunion for the mentorship program's alumni, over 300 people filling a conference hall in downtown Portland. Faces bright with ambition and self-worth. These were my real family, people who shared my values, not my DNA. I took the podium. 6 years ago, my family sued me, I said. They believed being related to me entitled them to my success. They were wrong. The lawsuit was dismissed. They tried to destroy me and failed. Success doesn't require family support. It requires determination, resilience, and the courage to walk away from those who diminish you. The applause thundered. Afterward, I stayed to speak with attendees, listening, advising, celebrating their victories. Around midnight, when the hall was empty, I walked alone through the quiet city streets. I felt no anger, no need for revenge. My family had destroyed themselves. Their lawsuit had consumed their savings, their dignity, their legacy. Lena's book sold fewer than 100 copies. Her blog lay abandoned. They had become cautionary examples in articles about greed and entitlement. Their attempt to claim my success had become their downfall, etched into public record, permanent proof of their delusion. I built something untouchable, succeeded in ways they never could, and walked away without looking back. The revenge was never in their ruin. The revenge was proving I never needed them at all.